Now, last time I was with you, I read Matthew 6, verses 14 to 18, because when I sent you some online stuff during the lockdowns, I began to look at the Sermon on the Mount. And I want to continue with the next section, which is verses 19 to 24 of Matthew 6. So it just follows directly on from what I spoke on when I was last with you here a month ago. And bearing in mind that the Sermon on the Mount is Jesus' discipleship manual, there's a big crowd to listen to the sermon. Some of them would stay the course of Jesus, many would not. And they would disappear. So Jesus was just laying out, listen guys, if you want to follow me, if you want to be in the Jesus party, if you want to be, to use our modern parlance, a Christian, that's post-Jesus language, a Christian, then this is what's involved in being a follower of Jesus, being a Christian. This is the deal. And this was probably the last big crowd that Jesus had, the last really big crowd, because some folk found the going a bit too tough. And we can see why. This stuff is radical. It's countercultural. And some of the stuff that we might say as Christians, the outside world frankly finds offensive. But it's the deal. This is what it means to follow Jesus. Let's read together from verses 19 to 24. This is the next section of this sermon. I'm reading from the NLT. Don't store up treasures here on earth, where moths eat them, and rust destroys them, and where thieves break in and steal. Store up treasures in heaven, where moth and rust cannot destroy, and thieves do not break in and steal. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be. Your eye is like a lamp that provides light for the whole of your body. When your light is healthy, your whole body is filled with light. But when your eye is unhealthy, your whole body is filled with darkness. And if the light you think you have is actually darkness, how deep that darkness is. No one can serve two masters. For you will hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and be enslaved by money. That's what I want to read. Jesus begins this next section of the sermon with a statement that frankly is utterly shocking. It really is. Don't store up treasures here on earth. Now, when you think about the context here, the disciples were, in the main, pretty ordinary blokes. They didn't come from privileged families or from money. They were just ordinary guys trying to eke a living. And Galilee, where they mostly came from, was a bit of a backward place. It was the most socially deprived and impoverished and deindustrialized part of the whole country. Not that Israel was wealthy, it wasn't. I mean, Israel perpetually lived through economic recession after economic recession, and parts of the Roman Empire were grandiose. You did have some huge cities, huge urban conglomerates that produced massive wealth, but that wasn't Israel. It was the back end of nowhere. And with the constant terrorism that took place and the political instability, those of you who are economists will know that where you've got political instability, the economy never grows. So these are ordinary guys in a backwards area just trying to make ends meet. And because they didn't have much, they were extremely careful with what they had. And suddenly Jesus says to them, guys, if you want to follow me, don't lay up treasures. And I'm sure they'd have sucked in a huge inhalation of air, thinking, my goodness, is that what being a Christian means? And I kind of get that. I grew up in a working class scheme in Belfast. Well, originally I grew up in Ethiopia, which was even worse. The poorest country at that time, the poorest of one of the three poorest countries in the world when I was there as a child. But when we came back from Ethiopia when I was 13 years of age, we lived in a scheme in Belfast. Just ordinary street called Roden Street, 212 Roden Street. My grandparents lived there. That's why we moved in. It was their council house. Actually, it was the house my gran was born in. And she lived in the same house all her life. And it was a basic brick-built house with the wee concrete backyards, the young folk won't remember places like that. We had a toilet in the backyard. It wasn't a part of the house. So if it was raining, you ran through the very short backyard to get to the toilet, which was freezing cold because there's no plumbing out there, no heating. So you were very quick, which had its advantages, I have to say. And it was a 3-bedroom mid-terrace. My grandparents in one bedroom, small. My parents in another bedroom, small. And the tiny bedroom, 3 of us as boys. There wasn't even enough room to have 3 beds there, so we just had mattresses on the floor. And that was our life. My grandparents never had a foreign holiday in their lives before. They did go abroad once to Ethiopia to see my parents. And my grandfather couldn't stand the food, so he ate bread for a month. Never went abroad. Never owned a car. He was a joiner in the shipyards, would cycle to work every morning, 6 miles, every morning, and come back, rain, hail, snow, on his bike. And in that kind of an environment, working class Belfast, in the midst of the troubles with all that went on there, and again, economic failure, we were taught certain values like make sure you save your money. And by the time I reached high school, which was 13, went to Grosvenor High School, I got 25 pence for pocket money. I had to work for it. I washed my dad's car, hoovered the house, helped with the Sunday dishes. That was what I did to get my pocket money, 25 pence. And my dad would say, now son, with 10p, you're okay. Just spend whatever you want. Sweeties, all that kind of rubbish, go ahead, do so. But 15 pence has to go in the bank. And he would monitor it. He actually put it in the bank because I was too young to have a bank account. But he kept a wee booklet for all of us and wrote all our savings so that when it came to Christmas time and it was obligatory to buy your mum a Christmas present, all those 15 pences were totted up. So I wasn't actually earning very much or saving very much in the long run because half was blown at Christmas time. And it seems to me that reading this verse, Jesus is saying that all those values I was taught in that wee Belfast council house were all wrong. And I know that some of you, including Jamie, I think it is, works in the banking industry. And I'm sure the bankers are sweating because maybe they've taken a wrong career choice, is what Jesus tells us here. Don't save up your money. But actually, we need to read Jesus properly. And the Bible probably, because the Bible itself doesn't prohibit private possessions. Neither did Jesus ever prohibit private possessions. And in fact, savings is okay because in Proverbs 6:6, we're told to look at the ant. Why? Why should we look at that tiny wee insect? Because in the summertime, he saves up food when there is food so that his family can eat in the wintertime. And in Timothy, Paul is very strong. In chapter 5, he says to Christians who aren't responsible with their money and therefore can't look after people who are in need, including members of their family, he said, how dare you behave like that? You've got to be responsible with what you have. And he goes on to say, God is a generous giver. And all that we have is given to us by God, and we need to appreciate it and enjoy it. Because God generously gives to us. So appreciate it. Really, to understand this stark statement, you've got to keep reading on, which is typical of all of Jesus' teaching, actually. And look at verse 20, because 19 and 20 come together. In verse 20, he says, but store up treasures in heaven where moths and rust cannot destroy, and thieves do not break in and steal. In one sense, Jesus isn't actually talking about the possessions per se. He takes focus away from possessions themselves. He doesn't mention any kind of possession here whatsoever. He doesn't mention any denomination of money whatsoever. Rather, he's focusing on our attitudes. That's the issue. And actually, rightly so, because if this was all about what we actually have and the money that we earn, then it would be a passage that would mostly be relevant to rich people and not relevant to the rest of us who aren't so wealthy. Truth is that you don't need to be wealthy to be materialistic, do you? Not at all. some of the folk I know who are most obsessed with money and possessions have very little of it. I've learned that from years of pastoral work. Visiting homes where the kids are not very well fed. They're not hungry. They get plenty to fill their stomachs with, but it's not always good quality stuff because they're existing off the food banks. And yet they're wearing Nike trainers and have an iPhone. Now, how absurd is that? But it bespeaks the materialism of our culture where things take on a value well out of proportion to their actual value. And that can affect you whether you're a millionaire or whether you're on benefits. It's all about attitude. And that's what Jesus focuses in on, our attitudes. He's not saying we need to be misers because that is counter anything that Scripture teaches us. What he's saying is that whatever God does give us, we need to hold those things in proper perspective. Now, just a few moments ago, we were led through a time of worship. And by the way, isn't it great to come back in to church and to sing? I've been couch singing through the lockdown. Debbie and I, neither of us are great singers, but hollering at the top of our voices on our settee and turning the TV up to really get a sense of the atmosphere. It's great to actually be here. And I shouldn't confess to singing quietly behind my mask, but I can't help myself sometimes. And some of you are laughing because you feel the same way. We are created to worship. And so Christ must be first. And then we're created to be in community and to love other people, including folk who are difficult to love and to care for them. And then below that comes all the stuff that we've got. That's what Jesus is talking about, having a proper perspective about stuff. And he gives two reasons, two rationale, if you like, for his business model. He says that if you store up treasures on earth, then they'll wear out, they'll get destroyed, they'll get eaten, or they'll get stolen. I have met so many people in the course of my life who have lost fortunes for all kinds of reasons, legitimate and otherwise. I've personally had stuff stolen from me. Actually, I'm away to a conference in France at the end of August, and the last time I spoke at this particular conference, it was a nightmare because my hotel room got broken into. My laptop gone, all the cash gone, my passport gone. And so I had to scuttle around and drive all over Switzerland. I'd gone from Switzerland into France for the conference to try to get a new passport for one trip. And by the time I flew back home, $3,000 was missing from my credit card because my computer had been hacked. Now, I didn't actually lose it because the banks kindly dealt with the whole issue and I never paid a penny. That was great. But it's amazing within 12 hours what people can do with a hacked laptop. We live in such an uncertain world. And actually, over the pandemic, we've been reminded again because my wife and I kept wanting to get away for a break. And we booked 8 mini breaks during the pandemic. Guess how many we've had? A big fat 0. Because they all got cancelled. We even ended up we were going to go out to Riga. It's the only place that Ryanair was flying to. Using up tokens from previous cancellations. And Ryanair was still flying there. The hotel cancelled. It shut down. Couldn't sustain its trade. Life's like that. And Jesus said, grow a brain. Everything that you have, it's very uncertain. You know how uncertain it is. So don't put all your hopes on the stuff that you can accumulate now. Whereas in heaven, the ecosystem there means there's no rust. The angels will prevent any theft because they're watching. And in any case, in a perfect world, bad things don't happen. So you aren't going to lose anything. Wouldn't it be a disaster shame if you put all your eggs into one basket here and you got to heaven where you could have had treasure and you don't have as much as you thought you had, but it's more secure than the stuff you had in large measure here, which wasn't secure. And his second rationale is, of course, Heaven lasts forever by definition. One of my friends who I'll be visiting this week, her grandmother rather, died during the pandemic, the second lockdown. She's 103. And while they mourned her, they were happy for her at the same time. She was a Christian lady, a lovely Christian lady, but had lived for so long she had no friends left. Her last close friend had died 3 decades ago. Can you imagine? In a nursing home for 2 decades with just memories. No people, they're all gone. 103. And even if you do manage to hang on to your possessions for 100 years, that's good going. It's a blink of an eye compared to eternity. Just a blink of an eye. It's a wee bit like the buzz you get on a roller coaster, which is fantastic, but it lasts for a few seconds. And then you get back to the rest of life. What if you could have that profound elation for all of eternity? That's what heaven is designed for. To give us a sense of wonder and joy and peace that's indescribable and unobtainable in this world. And it goes on forever. Isn't that worth investing for? That's what Jesus is saying. Invest in the next life. It is so much more important. Don't get caught up with the rubbish of this life. But of course, this is countercultural. And will our culture listen to this kind of stuff? No chance. And I think our culture is virtually irredeemable, bar a quantum revival. Our culture is virtually irredeemable because in so many ways it is so utterly faulty. I was telling some friends of mine recently that I was listening to the radio a few months ago. And Nihal Arthanayak, who's one of my favorite presenters, was on, and his guest was, he was dealing with sneaker culture, trainers to you and me. And his guest left university, very bright guy, but thought he could make more money just selling sneakers. And he does, from his house. But he sells high-end. His bestseller is Air Jordan's Retro High and University Blue. Just a pair of trainers. But he sells them for £743, plus postage. And I thought, that's pretty bizarre, isn't it? So I Googled, knowing that all Jordans are produced in China. Materials, $10.75. Labor, $2.43. The Chinese work hard. Overheads, $2.10. And factory profit, 97 cents. Sales for £743 in the UK. And Arthur Nack said, "You sell many?" He said, "I can't get enough of them. They just fly off the shelves." And he said, the bizarre thing is most folk never wear them. They're one of these things that you want to collect. So you have a glass cabinet, and that's where you stick your trainers, and you never actually wear them. Now, that's absurd. It's utterly stupid. And Arthur Nack was sensible enough to say, I just don't get this culture. To me, it's nuts. And he's right, it's nuts. But we do it. Now, you might be saying to me, I would never get into sneaker culture. But I wonder how many of you would blow a fortune on a gadget. Now, my kids are hassling me right now because I've got an old phone, and my contract is now ran out. So it's about time I get an upgrade. And that's a big challenge. I could spend a fortune on the latest model, and some people do. Or maybe it's what you have out in your car park and how many of them you have. Or what you furnish your house with. Now, I'm not saying that any of these purchases are wrong. They are not, and neither is Jesus. What he's saying is discipleship involves calculation. And asking yourself some profound questions about how do I actually want to use the resources that God has given me. And we're not given an actual equation to use here, because it's not about that. It's about growing in Christ and learning through our walk with Him what's valuable and what's not. And then learning to live as a disciple would live, following Jesus' footsteps. Now remember, no object is being mentioned here whatsoever, because it's not about the stuff at all. It's about our attitude. And here's where it hurts. I know lots of Christians who wouldn't hesitate to spend a fortune on some prized commodity. And I love biking, for example. I got a great motorbike. Love it. Spend a fortune on that. But when the church makes an announcement, we're doing an extension or doing some refurbishing or we're launching a new Alpha course, so can we have a special collection? They then begin to calculate, how much can I actually afford here? And it's amazing how the affordability fractions vary massively. Or if you discover somebody in need, and we reach for small change, but we don't want to go beyond that. Or maybe we know the tremendous work that God is doing around the world in mission, and we know that mission has huge financial needs. Well, we're a bit more hesitant there too, especially as we personally can't see the results. And Jesus said, think carefully. Think about your resources. For after all, verse 21, where your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be. What do I value more? World evangelism? Or the latest gadget? And we're being asked to think. And nobody's going to monitor it. Jesus simply asked us as disciples to think. And to think prayerfully. And to learn to make decisions that we know He would rejoice in and feel we are developing. And then look at verses 22 to 24. Your eye is like a lamp that provides light for your body. And when your eye is healthy, your whole body is filled with light. But when your eye is unhealthy, your whole body is filled with darkness. And if the light you think you have is actually darkness, how deep is that darkness? Now, eyesight is fantastic. And I've learned to appreciate it because my eyesight is absolutely rotten. If I took my glasses off, I couldn't see beyond maybe 3 rows. But eyesight is important because everything we do, driving home, cooking your dinner, watching the football, doing whatever, all requires eyesight. And eyesight helps you to make good choices if you go to a local market. I was in one yesterday with friends of mine in Kilmarnock. What fruit you pick will largely be determined, the wisdom of your choice will largely be determined by your eyesight and what you can see there. Jesus said it's all about how you see things, how you see your church, how you see poverty, how you see your neighbors, how you see your family, and how you view yourself and all that you have. And if you think your eyesight is good, but actually it's defective, then that darkness is a very deep darkness. So think prayerfully. And folks, I'm not in any way hectoring here, but years ago, I made a conscious decision before God. I'll just share this with you because it's something that means a lot to me personally. I made a conscious decision. I was at college at the time, and I was holding down 2 jobs to fund my college because I didn't get funding from the government for doing so. But before God, I made a decision that I would be careful about how I use whatever God gave me. And God has been immensely generous, but I'd be careful. And so I laid down some principles which I falteringly tried to follow, and I'll just read them to you. They're just personal. I'm not recommending these at all. I'm just saying these are personal things that I did because I found them personally useful. And it's how I've tried to live my life. Number one, buy things for their usefulness and quality, not their brand value. I actually don't give a stuff about brands. I like quality. I like durability. I do buy good stuff. The brand is meaningless to me. Number two, don't buy until you can afford it. Now, I do have a credit card. I've had one for almost 40 years. I've always paid it off at the end of the month. I have never, ever allowed payments to continue beyond a month. Never. And I have a mortgage. That's in one sense a kind of a debt, but that's necessary debt. So I'm not knocking credit cards or mortgages. But we've got out of the habit of just waiting until you can afford to buy that thing. And boy, what trouble it's got our whole nation into. Number three, shop around. My wife is brilliant at that. She scours the website looking for, we were in Tesco's yesterday, she said, I'm not going to buy that. I can get exactly the same thing cheaper in. And she mentioned a couple of other places that she knows she can get it cheaper. Shop around. Number four, learn to recycle and be satisfied with secondhand. That's no longer in our thinking, is it, in our contemporary society? We had friends in last night for supper and to watch the football. Great night together. And they hadn't been in our house, obviously, for a long, long time because of the whole lockdown stuff. They said, your living room's looking great. We decorated during lockdown. Looking great. And we broke into conversation about how comfortable the settee was. And we said, actually, that came from a charity shop, believe it or not. And as we reflected, there wasn't a single piece of furniture that we had bought new. Now, we have an incredibly comfortable home. I love it. My home is my castle. It's brilliant, and it looks great. Didn't cost a lot. Because values are important for how we do our shopping. Number five, never waste. We don't have a food bin. Why? Because whatever we cook, we eat. And we make the kids clear the plates. We always have done. It wasn't much of a problem, mind you, with my kids. They eat like horses. But we do that. And we use the fridge as well. Keep food over. Learn to love giving away. That's hard. Every once in a while, my wife says to me, get up in the attic. And if there's anything we're not using, find somebody who needs it. It's a glorious thing to do. I enjoy it. There's real joy in doing that. Number seven, learn to at least tithe. And I find that the most difficult of all, because there have been times when, quite honestly, we have had very little. Very little. It's been tough. You've all experienced that in your lives too. And so we've tithed because it's tough. And when it ceases to be so tough, and when God gives, and he has given generously to us, we do more than tithe because we want to express our love for God. Now, that's only personal stuff for me. It might not apply to you at all. All I'm saying is that part of my walk as a disciple of Jesus has been to think about what I do. And that's what Jesus is asking. Just think. Think about where your treasures actually lie. And then the passage finishes off. No one can serve two masters. One of you will hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot love God and be enslaved by money. At Glow, we have lots of departments. And we have some staff who work in between departments, and it's very difficult. Because your different bosses are pulling at you all the time. It's hard to work interdepartmentally. Can I say materialism can be a very brutal master? Because you can spend so much and still be utterly unsatisfied. Utterly unsatisfied. I listened to a tragic program a few weeks ago on the radio, again. A couple in America who had built, because they were multi-millionaires, maybe even billionaires, had built a vast house that TV shows were made of. And then they felt it wasn't good enough. So when the kids left home, they decided to build the biggest house in America. There only was two of them. So the house included indoor and outdoor tennis courts, indoor and outdoor swimming pools, and all the rest of it. And they were interviewed. it was amazing how empty they sounded as people. They still weren't satisfied. It's a terrible master. But Jesus, well, you know what kind of a master Jesus is because you all follow him. He's gracious and kind, and he fulfills you. He gives you joy. So who will your master be? Materialism or Jesus? The choice isn't tough, is it? Let's pray. Father, thank you for the painful words of Jesus as well as the comforting ones. Help each of us just to think as disciples and to learn in all that we do, just to listen carefully, to have good eyesight, to make good choices in life, and to ensure that as we follow Jesus, we really do follow Jesus and our lives resemble him. We ask it for Jesus' sake. Amen.